Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Literature in Robes. It's your host again, Mr. Jared. I'm here to review a few books today.
Oh, good.
I wasn't sure exactly how to approach going about this series because it's an unfinished series, but it's definitely one that's moving along at quite a clip. The author of the Bound and Broken series, Ryan Cahill, is a self-published author who built his own empire, so to speak. He's come onto the scene. He's gotten a lot of attention from booktubers, especially some of the more popular ones. And Ryan is basically creating his own classic fantasy in a lot of ways that kind of stands out of its own. It's still a familiar type of fantasy. It deals with your Western tropes. I know I speak of that a lot. Some of those tropes can be overused or displayed in such a predictable way that characters just kind of fall flat. But in these books, it doesn't really happen. Ryan Cahill has a good sense of character, good sense of building a world, and boy, what a massive world it is. And his plot lines and story beats and all that stuff really make for good reading. It really captivates the reader. There's just something about his writing that made me want to read on and on and on. So, Ryan Cahill, great. I was real skeptical about this because I think when you hear self-publishing, sometimes you're just not sure about how good it really is. However, that is just a huge mistake to assume that, especially when you read these books. So yes, they're all published and created and printed by Ryan Cahill himself. He's an Irish author, but he lives in New Zealand currently. He's got paperback and hardback, but the hardback editions are a little bit nicer. They have artwork in them. The covers on their own right have artwork on them, not just on the slip cases, the dust jackets, but on the actual books. So it's a very special purchase. The hardback books are just slightly better. They're a little more expensive, but they offer such a nice product compared to some of the hardbacks that you would find from the traditionally published authors. So it's really neat that Ryan Cahill took time to make a really quality product to sell, not just on the inside, but on the outside. So that being said, we're going to get into all of the 4 books that I've read so far. At this point, I believe he has 6 books with another short story that's kind of a Kindle edition. I can't remember the name of it. I will put the boop up there, or boop down there, or wherever. And he's working on the next book of Empire, and oh my gosh, I'm going to have to put that one up there too. Maybe I'll get the picture and the artwork because he just dropped the new cover for it. It's a purple cover. I'm kind of excited. I wonder if it's going to be as big as the book 5 of Blood and War, or War and Blood, or Blood and War. I think that's what it is. Blood and Ruin, Ruin and Blood, Blood and Ruin. Anyway, he's got a big fat chonker that's comes up after these 4 of War and Ruin, And it's almost, gosh, it's a big boy. So I'm kind of giving myself a break after reading these 4. I could just dive into it, but...
You serious?
So we'll start with the first one, The Fall, which is a novella. It's about 100 pages or so, a little less. It's a story, more like a prequel. It kind of establishes where the story begins in Of Blood and Fire, but it's in the past. It's 400 years in the past, which is in the scope of how long people live, depending on their race in these books or some capabilities that they may have. They get extended life by quite a bit. So that's an aspect of these books that kind of sets them apart. It seems like a lot of the characters, the main characters or characters of interest, are very much older than your average human being would be. But in The Fall, they address this cataclysmic event where there is an insurrection, and this book basically tells the story of that insurrection in that moment of when things are going bad. And it's a quick read. It gives you a very eye-opening experience to this world. You could see the vast scope of how complex the world was back when the fall occurred. The fall of this great city and civilization is what basically this story is about. You get exposed to some of the great characters, the people that are mentioned in later books, and it's a great way to start. You don't have to start with this one first, but I thought it was a great way to kind of dip my toes into Ryan Cahill's world and just see kind of what are we looking at here. It gives you clues about basically what to expect from maybe later books, because the world, when you begin the first book of Blood and Fire, is basically in this small little microcosm. But as you read in these books, the world gets bigger. In the fall book, you get an idea of how big this world is in just those few pages and the chaos that ensues from it. It gives you something to draw from once you begin reading the actual series. One thing that does stand out is there are some tropey characters introduced in the first book. The way the characters are presented through their dialogue, it comes from like this sense of the great knights, like the Knights of the Round Table. They have very proper language and sayings and things that they say that separate them and make them sound like they're more proper. So the fall is just a snapshot into the world the way it was before things kind of became backwards again, before the world kind of resorted back to its older roots. This is a great introduction into what to expect from Ryan Cahill's books. So I highly recommend reading The Fall just to get started into it. If you're curious but you're not sure about whether or not you want to read this, The Fall is a great introduction into that. You could read of Blood and Fire first and then The Fall to go back and find out what they were talking about. I find it advantageous that I read The Fall first, because then I could easily pick out what they were talking about in A Blood and Fire. And to give the Fall a rating, I would say that, I mean, it did come off as a little, in my mind, cheesy, but that is kind of because it lends itself to this classic English dialogue at times. It seemed a little stiff. It's just a short novella, but I really enjoyed it. It got me keyed in to want to just open up A Blood and Fire. It did its job, but I could only give it like a 4.0 out of 5 robes, because it wasn't quite there. I think I wanted a little more meat on those pages, or maybe a few more pages in there to just kind of give me a little bit more of the world. But it's easy for me to say that, because when I look back at the books, I wish there was a little more in there, but I don't know.
Please, I don't have any time for any gossip now. Eh? Yes.
The next book, Of Blood and Fire, is a splendid first book. There's something about this book, though, that feels very familiar. And the story on a whole, you can tell that the writing has been inspired by everyone's favorite classical fantasy writer, J.R.R. Tolkien. But it also has undeniable use of certain words, certain character types. He's not trying to blaze any new trails by writing this. Ryan Cahill is very much using what exists already in modern fantasy and classic fantasy. The elves, giants, dwarves, humans, dragons, which is the best thing. There's something about the way the dragons and the humans are in these books that make them really cool. The dragon and human relationship is really what sets this book apart from others. And it's really interesting how Ryan kind of reveals that relationship in Of Blood and Fire and continues it on in subsequent books. I just find that part of it very entertaining. Whenever they go into describing the relationship between the main character, Kaelin, and his dragon, I don't know what it is, but it's captivating reading.
Yes! That's awesome!
Ryan Cahill uses a lot of great little plot devices to kind of wiggle out some more information from the story and make it a little more tense, a little more, there's a little more at stake for the reader and for the characters that are in it, which is really refreshing. It's kind of like, and I hate to say it, but I'm just going to throw it in there, but it's almost like Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, but the Fourth Age. Something slightly new about it. If you know Robert Jordan's work, you understand that there are certain things that he built into his world, and one of the bad characters was called a Fade. And ironically, or maybe unironically, The Fade shows up in these books as well.
Oh my God.
It doesn't quite operate the same as the Fades do in Wheel of Time, but I think that Ryan justifies that by saying, hey, if it's there, it's there. It is what it is. I'm just trying to tell my story. And perhaps Fade is probably the best way to describe the character that he has put in there like that. But what do you do? I think in some ways it makes me as a reader and a high fan of Robert Jordan's work, sometimes I kind of roll my eyes a little bit about it. But the way Ryan does it, the way he writes it in these books, I forgive him.
Nice.
I forgive him because he's not telling the same story. He may be using a few of the concepts that I'm familiar with, but he's not telling the same story. He's got several different character plot lines and story arcs. Kyle's really trying to build a world that has believable characters in an unbelievable world. It's just massive. But he's trying to flesh things out, I think, to make it seem as though you never really can say that all the good people are good, and you can't say that all the bad people are bad. That way he kind of dances in that line of not really making all good people good and all bad people bad is pretty clever. Circumstances change. People could lose people, and that does happen in these stories too. So the title, The Bound and the Broken, is definitely apt for these books. It does not only address certain aspects of the world in the books that actually are bound or broken. The way the characters are brought about, these characters' lives and the loss and triumph, is definitely something that breaks you when you're reading it as well. So you get very attached to the story over time. Ryan is able to get you to feel things for these characters in a pretty quick amount of time. And as the books go on, he only gets better at that. Some of those feels cheesy a little bit, but it's hard to write humor and fun, I think, at times. Happiness is hard to write about at times without people rolling their eyes like, oh God. The dragon bit is really great. We begin the journey with that a little bit. I don't want to say too much, but it is a great way to open up this world in this first book. So my rating for A Blood and Fire, the first book, novel, in the Bound and the Broken series by Ryan Cahill, gets a 4.5 out of 5 robes. I was pleasantly surprised with this book. It made me want to continue to read, which I did, and I'll get to that next book. My favorite part was really the dragons, and just the way that Cahill slowly reveals how this world looks, how this world is going to interact with the characters, how it's going to provide an amazing story going forward. So let's get on to the next book of Darkness and Light. So I picked this one up pretty quickly. It was a quick read, kind of like the first one, but Ryan is getting better as an author. The prose is becoming a little more exceptional. The reading is becoming a little more it's just easier to come by. And Ryan is opening this world slowly with a can opener, just slowly letting out all the smells and aromas and flavors.
Freaking excited!
He does it masterfully. I'm surprised that this quality has come out in some of his first few books. And the man is very, very good at what he does. Just to start off, the second book is bigger than the first book. It's better than the first book. There's more characters, more POV chapters, which is something that he really relies on as point of view characters. It's hard for me to describe much of these books because I don't want to give away any of the details. I'm just trying to convey that they are worth your time. From page 1, you're entered into a battle. That's first few chapters in Of Darkness and Light, just blazing full force right at you. So it's a great way to start up the book. Then a lot of things happen. A lot of people kind of separate. The missions become different. Certain friends get split up. You learn a little more about the magic system. You learn more about the relationship between Dragon and Dragon Rider. And it follows that journey further and further. And the main character is really challenged in this book, tested to the max, I would say, in a pretty convincing way. I think Cahill puts the stakes right out there on this book. It's just really good reading. I don't know how else to describe it, but Ryan Cahill has really got something here. He's really hit the vein. He's got the gold vein right here, and he's mining it for all it's worth, and it's really great. So there's certain characters that you're very suspicious of that might seem on the surface to be good characters, but they often sometimes are described as having antagonistic traits or behaviors. You start seeing that Spartan characters start becoming vindictive, and you're just not sure if these characters are going to turn themselves around or if they're going to commit to being bad characters. And you see it a little bit more in Of Darkness and Light. So, I mean, as a whole, the third book, Of Darkness and Light, is just it just ramps everything up and keeps it going. There's definitely a direction where these books are flying. And as a reader, you just want to know, well, what the hell's going to happen next? I think that Ryan is pacing these books just right in a way that is pretty remarkable. Doesn't feel like he spends too much time just spending moments to establish too much character. There's always something that kind of is keeping that plot going, continuously creating tension.
Well, then I get all excited.
I want to give this book a 4.7 out of 5. It is a really
great story, compelling and rich.
It just really turns it up. And I hear Of War and Ruin is even more intense. It's got more point of view chapters. It's got more where you might think that a plot line is going this way, but then it takes a sudden turn. Characters that you thought were good go bad. So I cannot wait to figure this out. Eventually that book is going to get read, and I think the fourth book is also going to get read too. Well, the fifth, sixth, I don't know. I'm losing count because all of these books, whether they're novellas or novels, they all seem essential to the reading. They offer things that you won't get in the main storyline. And I think Cahill does that on purpose because he's trying to tell a complete story. But every once in a while, he has to go off and kind of fill us in on what really happened to get that character to where it was. And I think it's necessary reading. So I'm not ashamed to go ahead and pick up all these books, especially the hardcover editions. They're just beautiful. So yeah, I think Of Darkness and Light is a book about revolution, the oppressed trying to be the unoppressed. And we also get to see how the oppressed are very mighty, and this is not going to be as easy as we might think it is. Kind of reminds me of Star Wars, not just Wheel of Time or Lord of Rings. There's other stories that also come to mind when you're reading these books, and it's really fascinating and fun stuff. And on to the last book, The Exile. The Exile talks about a character that we were introduced to in the Of Darkness and Light book, a character named Dane, who is a prince of sorts who was exiled from the city he grew up in, and he was a princeling, and it goes through the overthrow of their city, what happens to Dane, because they leave a lot of that out in Of Darkness and Light, but we do know that something has happened to this character. He's been gone for a long time, and suddenly he's back. For me, in Of Darkness and Light, I didn't quite latch to Dane's character. I liked him, but I didn't quite see the point of him. I knew he was essential, and he would be a cornerstone in some of this story coming forward. It just seemed obvious that Ryan was trying to allude to this. But in The Exile, you really get his story, why he was exiled, hence the title, and what he went through in order to get back to where he was when we met him in Of Darkness and Light. And boy, is it pretty dark, pretty cool, pretty vengeful. It's got a lot of revenge and really meting out all the punishments that I would say Dane has really wanted to give to the people who did the stuff that they did to him in order to exile him from his kingdom. It was a little bit longer than The Fall, but that's okay. It was really chock full of good character moments. It gave me a really good sense of why I really need to like this character, Dane, and his sidekick, or maybe he's her sidekick, I don't know, Belina, who is from Of Darkness and Light as well. So there's just two characters that were introduced in Of Darkness and Light. They get a little bit of story in there just to kind of introduce them and move them in to the point of views that are going to occur. The Exile covers that whole background for you. Didn't take long to read that story at all. So Dane is one of my favorite characters, as well as Kaelin and a few others. I'm curious about one of Kaelin's friends. Again, I'm just not going to get into the names because I just want it to be as fresh as it can be for you that might take this up. This is a worthwhile reading adventure, and it also feels somehow good to read these books because you're supporting a self-published author. So I really want him to have success and hopefully sell more of his books and keep the story coming. It's going to be really great. He's young, so he might not have a health complication or any type of desire to put his story on the back burner for 18 years. George R. Martin. I highly recommend reading these books. It feels so familiar, having read Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time. Some fantasy just sets itself apart, and that's what I would say. Even though it kind of uses the same things, it just sets itself apart. And I think that's what Ryan Cahill has here. Something that's special. It's very familiar, but it's special. It's not even watered down. It's just this, I don't know, it's just a gem. It's just a little gem. And I really enjoy it, and I can't wait to read more. I'm also reading a lot of other books. I'm reading this series, as well as the Sun Eater series, as well as the Dandelion Dynasty, and I'm also reading the Gunmetal Gods stories as well. So I'm trying to read a whole bunch of series at the same time and just kind of interweave them. I read one of this one, then go back to this one. But the Bound and the Broken, it makes me look at, after I finish a book, I'm always like, should I read that? No, I'm just going to keep on my plan, keep my stories fresh. I've got the perfect little balance of things going on right here. And by the way, and I'll do reviews for all of those, but I recommend reading all those series right now. I'm in hog heaven reading some really good fantasy. The Exile, as a score, will be getting a 4.6 out of 5 robes. I really enjoyed it. I think it was just the right amount of story to tell Dane's back story. It makes me wonder about what's going to go on in the next book, which is, I think, a trait that Ryan Cahill really gets you with. At the end of each of his books, he gives you something that just surprises the heck out of you, and suddenly, I gotta go get that other book. So congrats to Ryan Cahill. I think he's a fantastic writer. I think he's a force to be reckoned with. If you ever see any of his interviews, he's a very passionate man, and he's got a lot of opinions about things, but he's Irish. All they do is talk. I'd hate to see what he talks like if he has a little beer in him.
I'm not really interested in being like a cool kid.
Thank you, Ryan Cahill, for an excellent series. I hope to be reviewing more of your books soon. I know you have another one coming out probably spring of 2025. It's going to be great. And so I hope you all have a nice day. Appreciate you for stopping in to listen to me talk about these new self-published books by Ryan Cahill. I definitely recommend them. And remember, keep reading. All they do is talk.